gone through various iterations over the centuries. Well, we're going to talk about more the constructed, the more designed, more focused nature-based solutions. And I just have a few examples here, and I'm going to go into them in more detail. Just now, I'm conscious that it's very warm around Europe, but I'm going to talk about something closer to our home here in Ireland, which is rain and water. But we will come to heat a little later on in the presentation. So for example, there are some of the co-benefits for nature-based solutions. There's different types of level of detail when it comes to when we're trying to control water in an urban area. You can, for example, provide a very special or specified defined solution, such as a rain garden, just to mitigate flooding or overflow. And usually in situations like this is something that is being put in to control water, and that's it. No other considerations, no benefits are being thought about. We just want to make sure that people's property isn't damaged by flooding or people aren't put in danger by flooding. So we just need to get the water away. And it's a natural or a green alternative to an engineered solution. But over the course of designing these things, we realized that we can actually create much better solutions in cities that have multiple benefits and co-benefits attached to them. So this is an example of on the left is Glasgow, and on the right is part of London, where it's essentially a big dip in the ground that's there to hold the water. There's no attention to planting, there's no design element, there's nothing there that says. And in fact, the issue we have in Glasgow here is that you can see the car in the distance. People are parking on them in the middle, and they complain that when they do park on the grass, as you can see in London they're doing there, the wheels go down in and they damage the car. So really the idea of the nature-based solution is completely lost on the community. They haven't got an idea of why it's there, and it doesn't really particularly look very well. So this is where innovating with nature-based solutions comes to bear, and this is where the co-benefits start to be explored more easily. And there's an example again of a particularly poor nature-based solution in the top left. But the main picture here is it's actually where this is our botany department in Trinity College. Unfortunately, I don't have an office in that lovely building. But in the foreground, you'll see what looks like just a bed, a gardening bed, but that is specifically designed to flood. In other words, the water runs off there into that area, and it's specifically designed to flood. And the same with the bottom left photograph in Tower Hamlets in London. No, that's not Tower. Yes, it's in London, where the water is attenuated on the roof of buildings, and it's then brought down to rain gardens down here on the ground, and very little of it goes into the public drainage system. So we see lots of co-benefits there, where you have something that's aesthetically pleasing to the people who live there, but it's still doing a job. Remember, the nature-based solution has to be doing a job. We're using nature as a technology to do something for us. But we're asking, why shouldn't it be doing multiple things? Why does it have to be, for example, ugly and boring, rather like an engineered, like a pipe or a drain, which to a lot of people doesn't exactly look very aesthetic. So that's the water. And this is another example from Barking and Dagenham, where all the water from all the buildings, there's a school there on the left of the picture, and housing on the right of the picture. And yes, of course, it's very obvious power lines. It's a former industrial area. But all of this is designed to flood, not just the wetland area, but all of the boardwalk and all of the area that you can see into the distance. And this is in order to stop any water, all water that is from leaving this area and going into the Thames, which is on the other side of that school. So the entire housing complex doesn't release any water into the system. And if it does, it goes out very, very slowly, so that it is clean and clear and doesn't cause any episodic flooding somewhere else downstream. This is the big issue we have in cities in some locations. So these are the types of co-benefits we're seeing. I'm sorry for the blurred. I didn't realize this was a blurred image. Well, it is on my screen. But during the process of developing these nature-based solutions in this area, we engaged in a co-design process with communities in that area. So some of the other benefits we're seeing from nature-based solutions, not only are they to do with the nature side and biodiversity side, as you can see in the picture on the right, but also the social and community side, the cohesion side, bringing people together to work on designing their own solutions in their own locality. And I think one of the greatest strengths that we have potentially in this is that by bringing people together to develop solutions, hopefully nature-based solutions, to climate issues in their area, they are also becoming more sustainable in their behavior outside. So we see people's behavior changing. We want to see behavioral change because that's how we're going to deal with climate, is our behavior has to change. So this is a very, very good example of how we can actually mainstream nature-based solutions in communities, but also build community cohesion in order to become more sustainable as a community. So the co-benefits start to take on greater aspirations. And before we lose control of ourselves, we have to also make sure, understand that it isn't a simple process. It's a very involved and involves and it necessitates a lot of activity. I did say I would come to heat and some of the co-benefits in that, and I'm going to give you an example of an innovation that we designed in a previous FP7 project that I was leading called the Turris project. And some of you might have seen this, some images of this. And it's constructed with a company in Germany called Helix Plantzen, and hopefully I haven't mispronounced that. I think it's Flantzen. And this is essentially, as you can see with the crane there, it is essentially almost like a Lego or a construction of what we're going to call a nature-based solution, and we refer to it as an outdoor living room. That's what this looks like now. It's not gone into the soil. It's on a hard surface. There's no ground there. So this is very much transported into the city, and it's transported into an area in Ludwigsburg that gets extremely hot during the summer. We can get up to 38 degrees, even higher in that location. And this allowed us to do experiments of temperature and humidity. And we found that around the area, even in the full sun, the temperature was lower. But what happened in the meantime, the co-benefits that came from this was that we started to notice things like much more physical activity, human activity in the area. That seat, we didn't put the seat there. People bring their seats to this location. We see there's 87 species of plant there, a lot of fruits, and as well. So we try to generate as much biodiversity potential as possible. And in fact, we got into trouble with biodiversity because our sensors were being taken away by the birds, the magpies. So we didn't get data for a whole year. We didn't know what was wrong. We realized the birds were stealing them. So they were nesting in our nature-based solution. But we did see a distinct change in temperature in an area. So we have these types of solutions that are available for cities that perhaps can't plant things. Maybe there's a lot of archaeology below the ground. Maybe there's not enough space, which would be a good example. Malta would be a good example of that type of scenario where it's impossible to do this. I see just someone mentioning about the cost of this. It compared to tree planting, it was not that much more expensive. But the joy of this, the co-benefits we have of this going forward is we can take this apart, change it, and put it back again. It can be moved around, and it can be put into different shapes as people decided. So the cost of it wasn't terribly high. However, the maintenance cost of it is where the main cost of this will be. It is no different than the normal cost of park maintenance or street tree maintenance from a local authority point of view. And one of the things we took with this is we decided, well, wouldn't it be really good to show people? Remember I mentioned about behavioral change. Let's show people what this is like. So we stuck it on the back of a truck, and a smaller version of it, and we toured it around Europe for a couple of summers. And we saw significant community desire to see more of these type of solutions. Currently, there are now 9 of them touring in Germany alone. And this has given rise to innovations such as potential for bus shelters and other types of small nature-based solution usage. So from an idea that we're trying to tackle the heat island effect in a city with a natural solution, came about a whole other areas, all sorts of areas of nature-based approaches that became very attractive to people. I'm just going to make sure that I'm not going over time, guys. Some of the co-benefits then of living walls, some of you might be familiar with this. On the exterior living walls, we see the lower picture on the lower left, and then on the lower right, how the living structure on the outside of the wall retains, cools the building down. It can retain heat inside the building in wintertime, and can have the opposite effect then in the summertime. But you know, this doesn't really strike me as living walls suffer from some of the issues that we are trying to deal with. Where's the nature in nature-based solution? Where's the biodiversity? So we see a new iteration of living structures that are trying to build biodiversity into their structure. And still having the co-benefits to retaining heat or removing heat, depending on what it is. And the other big co-benefit is in terms of noise and dust in cities. There's a significant dampening effect of noise and or sound, and that can have extremely high benefits to people, because we know, for example, that lack of sleep in cities can lead to significant levels of stress and strain, and we're seeing this more and more in cities and also rural areas as well. There's the indoor living structures as well that I just wanted to talk about. So we're starting to see more and more indoor living structures. Biodiversity isn't so much the issue indoors, of course, but we see much of our indoor co-benefits to do with well-being, health and well-being. The picture on the lower right there is from here in Dublin, and it's intended to be a map of the world, but of course Russia and Africa have kind of grown into each other there, and Europe has sort of disappeared, but it was a nice idea. But I'll also draw your attention to some of the, and Tyke mentioned it in his question earlier on, some of the barriers to living to nature-based solutions. And this nature-based solution on the bottom right is from the airport in Malta. It's a 3-story plastic living wall. So in other words, dead wall. So it looks like a living structure, and it's doing some of the functions of a living structure in terms of noise and so on. But some of the barriers are that the point is being missed perhaps by planners and landscapers and indoor people, that really it's the living element that can provide much higher co-benefits than just sound. And I just have a slide here, and I can share all these slides with you, so please don't be screenshotting everything. We'll be sharing all of these slides. Things like from some of the studies that were done, one here in Wageningen, where we see the co-benefits from an indoor living structures. I'm not going to go through all of that, but when it comes to performance, and I think when it comes to, for example, the lockdown situation that we had in Europe, having living structures inside your home office can actually be quite beneficial to people. So I would say that that coronavirus has probably opened a very large, I want to say, market, but also opportunity to innovate with indoor living structures. And so we do see, speaking of some of the challenges, some of the barriers to nature-based solutions. I've listed some of them here. Things like the societal concern, shifting patterns of habitation and migration. Our cities are constantly changing, constantly growing, and soon nature-based approach will be in the past, and there'll be another thing that we're trying to get sustainability into. So it's almost keeping the message going and keeping the message clear is kind of some of our big problems. But what I really want to just sort of conclude with a few slides on some of the co-benefits, just using the living roof as an example of how we innovate with nature-based solutions. In the past, we just put what are referred to as sedum roofs. This is a very simple plant that can grow practically anywhere as long as it's bone dry. It grows on walls and on beaches and so on. So it's very tolerant of a an urban environment. But really, putting a green thing there just because it can be there isn't really a solution. It's just basically choosing a plant that can grow on a roof. And whilst it does have some good flowering and there are some good varieties of it, it wouldn't be the most biodiverse route. So as Mario mentioned earlier on, when the definitions are starting to be sharpened of nature-based solutions, we know that if it doesn't support biodiversity and or ecosystem services, it cannot be called a nature-based solution. So we now have an opportunity to innovate further. And so we go from these to innovating with nature-based solutions on roofs so that they are doing more than just keeping the heat in. They're also places where we can farm, places where we can take exercise, and where we can have diversity that doesn't have to be green all the time. As you can see in the conference center, the top left one is the conference center in Vancouver, where plants are allowed to do what plants sometimes do, die, reseed, and come back to life. So biodiversity is being supported here instead of what we see the sedum version of it down below on the left, which is very much a monocrop. It could be a football pitch, it could be anything. So it's not the most biodiverse. At the same time, as we've moved more and more people into cities, there is a bigger demand from society to actually be able to use the roof. Can we use our roofs for example, for producing food? And this is what we see happening in Paris at the moment, one of the first urban farms, commercial farms on roofs under construction. And we see this in many other places where people who live in apartments don't have access to perhaps a garden or an allotment. Again, I come back to coronavirus. These are the types of things where if more buildings had this type of structure and this type of location, and yes, I know people have to keep distance from each other, there is still the possibility of dealing with some of these issues that the lockdown presented during coronavirus. And I have to also point out the coronavirus lockdown isn't the only lockdown we get in Europe. Every year we have forest fires where people are asked to stay indoors for a few days. Currently, and we've got a heat wave in Europe where people are being asked to stay indoors, keep cool, keep out of the midday sun. In parts of Northern Europe, when it's too cold or too wet, please keep indoors, it's not safe. So we do have a similar type of scenario every year in different locations around the world. So having the green structures, living structures on, for example, roofs and walls, can provide an outlet and a de-stressor for people. And this is the type of thing that we're going to be looking at, and Tig might chime in on this later on in new projects that are emerging. And then, of course, when we innovate with these, we innovate with them on things that are structures where we still can't see the roof, but we know it's there, and we see a lot of different type of innovations. And then also innovating with other technologies where we have a living structure, a biodiverse roof, but also solar panel or a bio-solar roof. So I'm concluding, I hope I haven't gone too far over time, Mario, but I'm concluding with essentially when it comes to nature-based solutions, we're a very greedy people. We want it all. We want them all, and we want them now. And we've seen in the corona scenarios that people were much more willing to engage with nature, much more demanding of having green spaces near their houses, in their houses, much more usage of the outside, because we saw people started to realize just how valuable having an open green space can be, especially at a time like the scenario we had during the coronavirus. And I also see the ultimate co-benefits of these nature-based solutions will be the idea of reconnecting people with nature, linking with natural elements in cities, and helping the citizens to become to have a more sustainable behavior, and to become more sustainable in the way they go about their business, and to therefore seek further nature and further demanding green elements in cities. So I can see that as being the potential innovating and growth area for nature-based solutions, but also potential panacea, a big problem solver for us in our cities. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus, and apologies everyone. It's something we weren't expecting before for the presentation. Uh, Marcus, do you mind if we finish the presentation and then we can go for? I think you have some questions in the Q&A section.
I'm just opening it
Um,
now.
I think maybe you should answer these first. If you want, you can answer them now, or you can also type in the answers as you prefer, really.
I have a short answer for Joseph. Actually, there are people who are calculating nitrogen in cities, but it's still in terms of nature-based solutions. But I'm not sure what the results of that are. Um, and yes, Hilda mentions about living walls. They do ask a lot of water. What we are doing is we're doing the combination so that roofs can retain water and be used for living structures. There is an experiment going on in London at the moment for actually a blue roof as opposed to a green roof where it is retaining water. But much of the water that can be used on living structures, I'll give you a very good example. Sorry for holding up, but a good example is there's a lot of air conditioners on buildings. They would produce a lot of water. That water can be reused with very easy, and it's ionized water too, which means it's actually very good for plants. So that can be used in a situation like watering. Um, so yeah, they're the two quick ones. And Tyke's comment. Sorry, Tyke, I'm just getting to it now. Uh, yeah, so the benefits are yeah. So that's I'll come back because I know we want to go into the next presentation. So I'll come back to that on Tyke. I'll answer that on the type. So Mario, did you?
Okay. If Ma- Yeah. So
Oh,
Marcus, I'm going to share my screen, if you
I'm
don't
just trying
mind.
to stop the share. There you go.
Okay. And hopefully there will be no further problems now. I mean, it's fingers crossed. Okay. So just a second, please. Okay. No, not this screen. I'm sorry for this. It's I'm getting used to the sharing screen thing. Okay, so basically, I think we will continue some of the discussion because we'll also be talking about indicators very soon. I want to briefly mention the nature-based solutions compendium that we have created with our stakeholders. So we have asked people to share what they consider as being nature-based solution, then we classify them and we sort of try to link the different to identify the different benefits from different nature-based solutions. So there's a map of Malta in this case. We also aim to increase the spatial coverage further and maybe include nature-based solutions in the Mediterranean region. This is a first version of the nature-based solutions compendium, and you can actually each nature-based solution or solution actually identified is also linked to the benefits or co-benefits and the original challenges, societal challenges that are being tackled to this nature-based solution. And this compendium is already openly available via the website. And the final point is actually something there were a lot of questions about during Marco's presentation is how to evaluate nature-based solutions. And I think this is something which is becoming more and more important, but we may not have a lot of good examples for that at the moment. And I'm going to share a few pictures here from Malta, where basically uh, often squares are being pedestrianized, and that is to make them more accessible to people. But the question is how well are we giving this is giving rise to benefits to people. It's okay, people can move from one place to another, but maybe it's too hot to do so in the first place. And how much benefits there are to biodiversity. So there are several examples right now of pedestrianizations and re-embellishment of squares. But what we don't really have often is a measure of how good they are in giving rise to benefits to the environment, to biodiversity, and and to people. This is showing one of the main squares in Malta, for those of you who don't know where this is. Before it was a bus terminus, and now This is this large open square. Um, so there is a limited understanding of the benefits, of the co-benefits, in terms of air pollution improvement, for example, as we've mentioned before, in terms of if we're saving water as opposed to using more water, especially in our climate, in the Mediterranean climate, for example, in terms of noise reduction, in terms of benefits also to for recreation and so on, and for interacting, for societal interactions. So we need to develop, I think, indicators for these things, and they should be linked to projects where nature-based solutions are implemented. A few examples here. This is for green roofs, and the sources here. This is not our research, but impact of green roofs on pollinators. And you can see that, well, as Marcus was saying, forage is important. Having flowers is very important, but it's more than that. It's also the substrate. So it's not just having a green roof. You can see here the substrate character in the second set of plots. Having a fine substrate character is very important for improved wild bee diversity and abundance. That's because of the nesting size. So there are these technical aspects about biodiversity that we have to consider, and we need to have good indicators that measure at least some of the key taxa, some of the key groups, and see if we have an impact there. You could use also uh, maps and data for ecosystem services. And this is data that we have for Malta, for example, measuring the effectiveness of different ecosystems so far. This has not been done for nature-based solutions, but this is an indicator that we have created. It's called the Index of Effectiveness of Urban Ecosystems. How well are they performing in providing benefits? And you can see this is based on the maps we have seen before, but also based on the maps of noise reduction, climate regulation, and so on. This is for regulating services. And you can go into more spatial into higher spatial resolutions, and these types of indicators can be used to assess how well the nature-based solution is performing. So once a nature-based solution is implemented, you could have these. I think we need, not you could have, we need indicators like these for biodiversity, for ecosystem services, um, to actually assess how well they are performing. And if they are not performing well, if they are become, some cases like for water in Mediterranean, they could become more of a problem than a solution if you end up using more water. So we need indicators like these, and based on these indicators, these ecosystems have to be managed in an adaptive way. So this is basically the cycle that we are sort of using in ReNature, and we are also collaborating about this with our practitioner colleagues. And this is really my last slide. We cannot be together in a traditional workshop. And I hope that please feel free to share your experiences with us during this webinar. And now we have two more presentations basically. We can stop for a short break of 10 minutes. I think we can come back at 11:15. And after that, we will take the next presentation, which I think is Miriam. And also we will have some more time for questions and discussion later on. Okay, thank you. We're going to stop here for a short break of 10 minutes.
Mario?
Yes, David.
We have a question, I think. I don't know if you want to answer now or later.
Yes, I can take the question now. Just a second. Okay. I'm not sure I have any questions, David. Okay.
From the chat.
From the chat. Okay, sorry, I was looking at the wrong place there. Okay, so how was the index of effectiveness of urban ecosystems built? What variables does it take into? Okay, Pedro, it's so basically one of when we were doing these assessments of ecosystem services, always a key aspect is the area, the amount of area covered, and that's just one of the variables. However, it's also about the condition of the ecosystem, and what we did basically, we used data about the condition of the ecosystem and data about the extent of the ecosystems to calculate ecosystem service. So with using specific indicators, And then the effectiveness is actually based on when you remove the area factor, because that was always a key predictor of how much service that you had. And then it's an average based on a number of regulating ecosystem services. It's a paper we are hoping to publish soon. It's currently under review. But it's using data for a total of 4 regulating ecosystem services, and we found it useful because we found a lot of synergies when you assess regulating ecosystem service together. So where you find a lot of one service, you also find often, let me put it like this, you often find a lot of another service. And we thought that one simple or relatively simple indicator, which would act as a sort of a simple data set, which could be calculated, is actually more beneficial than having several indicators at one go. Okay, I think that's basically it. So I think we can stop for a 10 minutes break. We're back on 11:15 our time, and I think we'll take it from there with the presentation by Miriam.
Thanks, Mario.
Cheers.